Well, good evening, everybody. Can I begin by acknowledging and pay my respects to the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet this evening, and extend those respects to elders past and present and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us this evening. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. By acknowledging country in this Parliament, we aim to continue breaking down barriers and to build trust across communities. The Parliament of New South Wales strives to work alongside Aboriginal communities to listen to their voices and to build a better future for all people in this state. For those who I haven't met, my name is Ben Franklin, and I'm the President of the Legislative Council. I'm one of two presiding officers here at the New South Wales Parliament, along with Greg Piper, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. Now, the 25th of August 2024 will be exactly 200 years since the first sitting of the Legislative Council. And the building that you entered through tonight is the oldest continuously operating public building in this country. During our bicentenary year, we're acknowledging the significant milestone in our collective history by reflecting on our past, celebrating our present, but perhaps most importantly, imagining the future of democracy in this state, a future that you are all a deep and important part of. Throughout the year, we've been hosting a broad range of events, including conferences, cultural events, and regional roadshows across the state. And the Bicentenary Seminar Series is another critical foundational element. It aims to foster conversations about the valuable contribution that diverse representation has made to democracy in New South Wales, while providing an opportunity to reflect on how we can continue to engage and support diverse voices into the future. And tonight, we will dive into powerful stories that transformed New South Wales and our Parliament's upper house across the last 40 years to reflect the changing cultural diversity of the community it represents. Our panel of current and former Legislative Council parliamentarians will share their fascinating experiences and insights as members from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. We'll hear about the landmark upper house inquiries that have helped shape the nation's first multicultural policy to improve justice outcomes for communities and to address racism. This seminar will explore how the journey unfolded in the New South Wales upper house through stories and personal insights from those who lived through that experience. So can I introduce the panel that we have with us tonight? Starting on my right, we have the Honourable Daniel Mookey, MLC, who is the Treasurer of New South Wales. To my immediate right is the Honourable Natalie Ward, MLC, the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, and a former Minister for Multiculturalism in this state. To my left is the Honourable Dr. Helen Sham-Ho, a former member of the Legislative Council and the first ever Chinese-born Member of Parliament in Australia. To her left is the Honourable John Ajaka. John was a former Minister for Multiculturalism, a former President of the Legislative Council, and a Lebanese-born Australian. And to his left is the Honourable Bob Nanva, MLC. Bob is the Government Whip in the Legislative Council and an Iranian Australian. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Tonight we'll be investigating 4 topics, and we'll spend 15 minutes or so on each topic and end with each panellist in those topics will add their own insights and their personal experiences. Those topics are, firstly, culture and identity in the upper house. Secondly, milestones for multiculturalism. Thirdly, engaging with called communities. And finally, imagining diversity for the future. And at the end of the session, it'll be your turn. You can have the opportunity to take the floor and to ask your questions of our amazing group of panellists. Now let's kick off the conversation. In just a few weeks, we mark the 200th anniversary of the very first meeting of the Legislative Council. When it met on the 25th of August 1824, the Council was an advisory body to the Governor comprising just 5 members, all men who in one way or another were men of the British Empire. The council has come a long way since then to become the robust, fully directly elected 42-member strong upper house it is today. And we're all incredibly proud to say it's a council that has increasingly reflected the vibrant, culturally diverse community across this state. So we begin our discussion tonight by hearing from our panel members about their experiences being part of history. And who better to start with than Helen Sham-Ho. Helen, you're Australia's first Chinese-born parliamentarian, elected in 1988. What did this achievement mean for you, and how did it shape your sense of the community that you were representing?
Well, sorry. That's okay. Thank you for the question, Mr. President. No, it is quite a landmark election that day because you were saying it was it was South 42 upper house. In the past, it was elected, it was nominated, and I was the first elected, and that was the first elected upper house class, I call it Latte 88. So I feel that at that time, there was increasing number of migrants, and also, I think most of you would understand the Chinese migrant came here over 200 years ago. That's a long time ago. It was a cook, I believe, in one of the first boats from England, a Chinese cook. But then, of course, the demographic changed because in the mid-1970s, I think in the old days it's called White Australian policy, but it was abolished at that time in the 70s. So in 80s, there's a whole change in the demographic picture because Chinese at that time didn't come so much because of the dictation test, the White Australian policy. But after it's abolished in the 80s, a lot of people from Hong Kong, I came from Hong Kong. So because 1984, the British Prime Minister Telsha changed the agreement that Hong Kong to return China to 1997. So in the 80s, a lot of Hong Kong migrants came here. It's not necessarily from the mainland China, which is different at the time, until 1997, when Hong Kong was an English colony. So I I was then only overseas student in the 60s. So when I became a first Chinese member, I was that year, 1988, was the first election where everyone, upper house or lower house, are elected. I was lucky enough that when I did my law degree, at that time, there was the Attorney General who's my supervisor. So in fact, if I may say it very briefly, it is a set of circumstances that more or less pushed me into becoming a member to go for election. I didn't think I'd get up because I was very last one of the list. You know, when you election of the upper house is in the list in the old days, even now. So I was the very last one to get elected. So I feel that not only proud of myself, I was very pleased for the Chinese community because in the old days when they came, they were not professional people. They meant in restaurants and lower structure kind of employment. But now that they have a voice in a democratic democracy, like a great democracy in the old days I call. So I was very proud of myself. And it was euphoric, if I may use that word, of the whole Chinese community. So they supported me. But I keep on telling them, it's not only the Chinese community who elected me, actually. They start to recognize, I was telling you just now, multiculturalism. Because it started about 70s, 80s. It was blossoming up. I thought it blossomed out in the 1980s. Yeah. So I was very proud, and they are very pleased to support me. So that's my thought.
I mean, you were a trailblazer, and it's wonderful. Yes. But you weren't actually the first woman from a called background to be elected. That was Franca Arena. And yes. I'm told that you were obviously members at the same time, but you lived in neighbouring suburbs.
Yes.
And a little birdie tells me that you actually caught a cab home together from Parliament from time to time. Can you tell us some of perhaps a conversation that happened in that cab?
Yes. Oh, Franca is Italian background. I think she was the first non-English speaking background. In the old days, called NESB. Now it's Well, see, they did. I don't think people know what it is. It's
That's
culturally
and linguistically diverse communities. Yeah.
So words have changed, but things haven't changed. We live in neighborhood in northern beaches in Chile. I live at Balgala and she lives at Quantas. So we are just almost next street to one another because we are just neighboring. So when we talk about the ethnic group. Because Frank did a lot of groundwork for me, actually, because it's ethnic. In the old days, we are called an ethnic member. So I accepted that because Frank has accepted that. So we talk about those kind of things that she went to Italian thing. And in those days, of course, the Greek and the Italian had the multitude of people around the whole state. And the Chinese just started, as I was saying to you, Chinese, or Chinatown always there. So that was very small comparatively. But because of my election, everybody started to be more open to politics, because Chinese don't believe in politicians, don't believe in politics, because as you know, for many, many years, without going to the history, the Chinese have been very authoritarian, they have emperors and things, so they are not used to democracy. That's why they didn't vote. I think I was a very person who translated in Chinese. I have this act this, in the old days, they don't believe Chinese votes, but I think they do now, because like Burwood, Hurstville, Parramatta, Cabramatta, they are all ethnic people. Yeah. You have to translate, and that's what I did.
Thank you so much. John, can we move to you? Now, you were born in New South Wales, but you've got Lebanese heritage. You've been and lived in Lebanon. In your inaugural speech, you spoke of the experiences of racism which were encountered by migrants in Australia. And I'm just going to quote a little bit of that, if that's okay, because it was really powerful. You said, "If the first reason for my presence in this place is to fight prejudice, the second is to fight injustice." So can you tell us about what your experience as a member from a CALD background, an NESB background, and how it shaped what you saw yourself as representing in the upper house?
Look, thank you. I find it interesting. One of the most fascinating aspects, and I did again tonight, is I like walking around seeing all the old photographs of the previous members of the Legislative Council. And so, of course, when you look at those photos that were from 1930 and below, what you find, of course, is a wonderful group of 42 Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Celtic men with white beards and white hair, and that was the reality of it. As you move along, you suddenly discover more diverse. And of course, if you look at the upper house today and look at the very last photos that are up there, an incredibly diverse 42 men and women from all backgrounds. And that's something that this state should be incredibly proud of. Now, I'm proud of the fact that it took till 2007 to be the first Australian of Lebanese background to be elected as a Liberal to this place. Labor did it so much better. You did it so much earlier. The first non-Anglo-Saxon Member of Parliament was the Honourable Alex Allam, who was of Lebanese background, who was elected in 1927, 1928. David Blunt will know the exact year, but it's thereabouts. And his photos are up there. He's also the longest serving MLC of 42 years from a Lebanese background. So the reality is it took the Liberal Party from 27 to 2007, literally before it had its first member. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, on the journey of a pre-selection, I was told on numerous occasions, why are you bothering? Step down, withdraw. Good old Liberal tactics. Withdraw. You're never going to get elected. We've never had a person of Lebanese background. Why are you wasting your time? If you want to do it, go join the Labor Party. It was... We'd have the same problems, John. But, it was wonderful to be able to prove them wrong. It really was. So, for me, the reason I quoted that is, look, as they've said, many people have said on many occasions, injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. A type of injustice is all injustice. We can't have that in a country such as Australia. I'm a father of 6 daughters. I wanted my girls to be able to live in a place where they were treated equally in every respect. And so, as I get older in this life, I remember when I was younger, the first question people would ask me was, where are you from? And of course, I'd be thinking, what has that anything to do with who I am, what I am? Today, people ask me how old I am. And I say, for the love of God, ask me where I'm from. That's so much better. But the reality is, again, I love these cliches. We are one, we are many. But that's really who we are. We are now in a situation that we are all proud of being Australian. But we're all proud of being Australia with so many different cultures within the one culture. So I say to anybody, in particular, core community, non-core community, if you have an ambition, don't let anyone tell you you can't become, because you come from a particular ethnic background or you come from a particular religion or anything of that nature. Fight the prejudice all the way. We're one.
Yeah. Beautifully put, thank you. Daniel, now you've been a member of the council since 2015, but in 2023 you set an Australian first by swearing your oath of office on the Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita. You said at the time, this is only possible because Australia is so open and so welcoming to the contributions of people like my parents, who I was thinking about a lot as I took my oath earlier today. Talk to us about what it meant to you to be able to do that.
Well, firstly, I did have the opportunity to become the first Australian minister to swear in on the Bhagavad Gita. I was also the first parliamentarian in 2015 to swear in as well. I had to bring my own copy, which was good. It was my mother's copy of the Gita as well, which was very nice. And I did make the point, and I still make the point, that a minister with access to the Hindu gods, a treasurer with access to the Hindu gods, is very much in the nation's interest, because we have a god of money, and I pray a lot to the gods, I have to say. And equally, I did make the point that really, when I did take the oath, I was thinking a lot about my parents. My parents came to Australia in 1973. My father was one of the first people to benefit from the final end of the White Australia policy. And he came as a geologist to work. He swapped the north of India to outback South Australia to work on the Roxby Downs uranium mine. And then saw the light, left Adelaide, came to Sydney. But in Sydney, my mother, at the time, the Indian community was tiny. Just tiny, right? There maybe 50 people. The one shop in Bondi everyone knew, everyone used to go to. And my father and my mother began to engage in what we would now describe as community organising. And by that I mean my father created the first Indian newspaper that was published in New South Wales, the Indian Monitor. He famously got an interview with the Prime Minister of India when he visited in 1977. They also helped establish the first Hindu temple in Australia, which is the Shri Mandir in Auburn. But equally, part of the effort that created the first Gurdwara, as well as the first Jain temples, and quite a few of that, because the community was so small. And so that is what coloured my background and my thinking as well. But my father passed away when I was very young. He passed away when I was 5. And my mother raised myself, my sister, my brother. And we had access to excellent public schools, excellent healthcare, and that was what coloured my background. So with coming as a son of effectively a widow, migrants who sacrificed a lot to give these opportunities, growing up in the western suburbs of Sydney, being able to firstly get elected to the parliament is a huge honour, and then to become a minister is an even better honour. And I have to say that's what I was thinking about. And I'll just make this point. When I took the oath at Government House, I finally was able to convince my mother that this politics thing might have a future. She does think that being treasurer is excellent experience for my eventual career in IT.
Let's move on to Bob. Last year saw the election of Bob Nanva, a real rising talent in both the Parliament and in New South Wales. And in his inaugural speech, he paid tribute to both of his parents who migrated to Australia from Iran. Bob, you spoke about the language barriers that your mother faced, as well as the social isolation and the pressures that she encountered. I guess first, tell us how they responded to you getting elected to the Parliament of New South Wales.
Getting elected to Parliament is a really big deal, but it's an even bigger deal for my parents. To be able to answer that, you've got to understand the context of their upbringing. So they grew up and lived in Iran. They lived through a secular and then a religious oppression. So to see their son emerge and get elected and ostensibly have a role in the laws of the land of their new homeland was a huge source of pride for them. But more than pride, it was this sense of vindication that they made the right choice 40 years ago when they left their country and came to Australia. So for me, certainly in my inaugural speech, I wanted to pay tribute to that, but more than anything, I really wanted to tell the migrant story. A lot of people broadly understand it, but unless you've lived it, you really don't comprehend it. So I really wanted to tell my parents' story through the eyes of a first-generation Australian, and that is, the story of grit, of determination, of sacrifice, but more than anything else, frankly, the sheer gamble in the hope and opportunity of Australia, which is what they did. And I wanted to tell that story, not just to honour them, but I suppose to make it pretty clear that migrants like my parents are the most patriotic people you will find in Australia because of everything they left behind to live here. So they constantly nudged me into politics. Their patriotism is grounded in their love of the country's cohesion, its stability, but its democracy. And Dad particularly would always say to me, these things don't subsist through good luck or good fortune, but by constant hard-fought nurture. And the best place to do that is through the Parliament. So I suppose that has informed, my values. It's informed how I participate in this place, and that is ostensibly to, put aside division, don't play to the brace of hyper-partisanship, embrace the stability and the cohesion that my parents really wanted to come here for, and what better place to do that than in the collegiate environment of the upper house.
Yeah, beautifully put. I think that's a point that I want to make, which is that the upper house is actually quite unique and very different to the lower house. We are actually genuinely collegiate, and I class all of these people up here on the stage with me, even though none of them are in the political party that I represent, to be not only colleagues who are trusted, but friends. And you can do that in the upper house, I think, in a way that you can't sometimes do it in the bear pit, perhaps in the House of Assembly. But I do want to touch on this issue a little bit in the final question of this theme, which is to look at the representation of the upper house and who actually gets elected. Now, we've had a number of these seminars, and in one of the seminars that we've had, a former member, Dr. Peter Phelps, who was a former government whip, suggested that the nature of representation in the upper house in some ways made it easier to get more diverse representation because of how the upper house is elected than the lower house. And so I'd like to talk to two party leaders in Natalie Ward, who is the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, and Bob Nanva as the former General Secretary of the Labor Party, and just ask what your views are about political parties, particularly the ones that you represent, but general views about the ease or otherwise of diverse representation in selecting upper house tickets particularly. We'll start with you, Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. President, and can I thank you so much for hosting this fantastic event. It's such a delight to be here, and thank you everyone to sit with our colleagues and talk about the wonderful things that happen in this place, and for you to highlight them in this 200 years is wonderful. I stand out for a slightly different reason. I'm the white Anglo Northern Beaches person, but it's a real delight for me to be able to participate, and I can absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you. The upper house is a unique place where we do have the opportunity to be collegiate through committees, and despite what you see at question time, it's sort of an unspoken secret. It's one of those things you don't tell too many people. It is the most fantastic place. It is so constructive. I have to be on my best behaviour because my mum is here tonight. But it is the opportunity to, in the upper house, select people that are not necessarily from a particular electorate, so that they can represent the whole state. But we really have seen in our history the opportunity to do that through John and others, where we can really lead the way through this is the best person for the upper house, as opposed to this is the person in this electorate that fits the demographic. And that is, I think, something that we can lead as parties with. I'm really delighted that we could do that in a number of ways. I mean, I stand on the shoulders of people that have been ahead of me, but the great privilege for me is I really am an immigrant. I'm from South Australia, and of Welsh heritage. So, but it is an opportunity for someone, and I think, Mum, I can say this, someone from South Australia. I think everyone in Australia, can I say, don't we live in the best country in the world? And thank goodness for multiculturalism, because otherwise the food would be incredibly boring in this place. You can go out and have Chinese, Korean, French, anything else on any given, Indian, anything on any given night. And in this place, we've seen the evolution. But the great delight we have is that everyone in Australia, unless you are Indigenous, has heritage from somewhere. And that is something that I think unites us. We can talk about our mutual heritage. And in the upper house, the opportunity for our parties to lead the way is something that we can do through force of personality. We can do through force of our parties leading that. And I think we're getting much, much better at it. Do we have a way to go? Absolutely. John, not everyone in the Liberal Party looks like me. And there are certainly, we're getting much better. We have our first Muslim Member of Parliament in Tina Ayad. We have others, who really have led the way for generations. But I think we all know and are aware that the great opportunity in the upper house allows us the 8-year term, the opportunity to create differences and drive through committees. And I know we may touch on this later, but through the committee process to really look at some of those specific opportunities. So it's a great pleasure for me, but can I say I'm really delighted to stand with my colleagues here and share in what would otherwise. And I look at those pictures as well, John. I see those men as I walk up the stairs and look at how this place has changed. And goodness, looking back 200 years, if they saw all of us sitting on the stage here and saw the diversity of offerings in the cafe and dining room at night, they'd be quite beside themselves. But sometimes I pop in here very sneakily and flick through some of the Hansard behind us just because I'm a nerd. But it's delightful to see that some of the issues we're talking about, we can bring such diversity to through our parties and through our representation. But each of us, I think, is very aware that we are a much, much better place for having us each leading the way on diversity, but also encouraging that needs to happen so much more. And I'll finish on this point that I think it's there are far too many lawyers in this place. I am one, recovering, as I think a few of us are. But I remember my brother said to me, it's sort of the perception when you're in this bubble here, you think everyone in the world knows what you do with day to day. But my brother, when I was a practicing lawyer, and I said, I think I'm going to do this politics thing. And he, as only siblings can, said to me, well, people really don't like lawyers very much, but they definitely don't like politicians. Do you really want to do this? And so I think I can make a difference. So, it's perception. It's about what you perceive and how your family and your culture perceives this. But I think now friends see, and hopefully Mum sees, that this is something where I really want to make a difference and partner with our colleagues to do this in this place. And we can do that so much better if we are culturally aware, if we're diverse. That makes us so much stronger. And it's just a privilege to be able to delight in that and learn through it.
It's been mentioned a few times that the former members, For decades, the former members were not only white, but were men, and so pretty much all of them. And I'm delighted to say that for the first time in this session, we are almost at 50% in terms of male-female parity as well. There are 20 women and 22 men, so we have one more to go, but I think that's pretty good. We're getting there. Bob, what do you think about this from your party's perspective?
Look, so without getting into the technicalities of getting voted into the upper house, to get elected into the upper house, you have a reasonably smaller quota. I think it was 3 or 4% to get elected. What that ultimately means is you have a far more diverse range of candidates getting elected into the upper house. That's why it's been quite the leader in terms of the range of candidates that get elected, whether it's gender, call diversity, or just sheer communities of interest that are represented in the upper house that you may not see in the lower house. But with respect to the party's involvement in getting diverse candidates elected, the way parties pre-select their candidates for the upper house is quite different to how they are pre-selected in the lower house. So in the lower house, you have all the vagaries, certainly in the ALP, of rank and file pre-selections. You then have to go through the gauntlet of getting elected in the seat with the vicissitudes of electors voting on any number of things for any number of reasons. So the party's capacity to actually control the selection and then election of a called candidate is pretty difficult in the lower house. That is very different in the upper house. So to be very crude about it, the upper house tickets for the parties are ultimately pre-selected by the factions and by the party organisations. What that means is you have a far bigger element of control over who is pre-selected and placed on that ticket. In certainly recent years, political parties have become far more sophisticated with respect to the calculus of who is put on the ticket and who is put on the ticket in a winnable position. Do you have the right gender balance? Do you have the right diversity balance? Do you have a balance of people with different interests? And that's not just electorally smart. It is smart because it strengthens the party caucus. So there is a lot more analysis and sophistication that goes into the selection of an upper house ticket within major political parties than what might otherwise have been the case. So certainly there is a huge amount of control that political parties can leverage to getting more people of colour and a gender balance in the upper house. And I suppose the election method here just makes it eminently easier to do.
That's, I think, a beautiful segue into our second theme for the evening, which is milestones for multiculturalism. Because the early 2000s were genuinely watershed years for multiculturalism in this state and, in fact, in this nation. In 2000, for example, the Legislative Council conducted an inquiry into multiculturalism. Now, this was such an important step towards New South Wales becoming the first Australian state, in fact, only the second jurisdiction in the world, to enshrine multicultural principles into legislation. It was actually a really significant and incredible achievement. And soon after, the council undertook a landmark inquiry into policing in Cabramatta. Now that remains a really significant inquiry in that it worked with called communities across that region to scrutinise the policies and the practices of executive government, in this case, the police force. And it did it by engaging with communities where they were, rather than telling them they had to come to us. So I want to start on the multiculturalism inquiry first. Helen, you were around during that really important inquiry and the legislation that was passed by Parliament. How important was it that New South Wales became the first state in the country to enshrine multiculturalism? And what did it mean for the called communities that you were such an important part of across New South Wales at that time.
Thank you for the question again, President. Thank you. This is recalling for 20 years ago. It was a very good inquiry. I don't know if people know about inquiry, because you have different, different number of upper house members as in the inquiry, usually about 5 or 6, I think, we know. But that inquiry was because of the fact that there was a lot of crime, actually, at that time, in the western suburbs. Specifically, maybe I can say that at that time, was Cabramatta. It used to be called crime capital of Australia. That was the nickname for Cabramatta area. And it so happened because I was a lawyer at that time at Cabramatta, so I know the area quite well before I was a member. So I know the diversity of groups there. At that time, there's a lot of Asian migrants there, specifically too is from Vietnam. Because you remember in the late 70s, they have an open door almost for the refugee from Vietnam. A lot of boat people in the old days called. So at that time, there was a need actually to see what's happening, what happened to the crime. And of course, because of language difficulty, and being a lawyer there before, so I understand perhaps better perception of the people there. Not just Vietnamese, there are a lot of Southeast Asia anyway, Asian area actually. So I was the one who suggested in a sense that we should have some kind of inquiry. This opened because I suggested I was working there as a lawyer, and I was, in fact, in the old days, I don't know about now, upper house member don't have an electorate, as we all know. But at that time, they have sectors where you are responsible. And I was, with the Liberal Party, I was responsible for that area, the western, outside, sort of southwest area. So I was not only because at that time it was the Labour seat. I think people remember John Newman, who was the first and only political assassination. And I know John Newman quite well because we are both, he represented the Labour Party, I represent the Liberal Party at that time. So I know it very well, and he does too. But he was assassinated in 1997 or 98. And that's when I came in, become more or less a local member at that time, because there was another, may I say that, Labour member, but she doesn't live there. In fact, she lived in the eastern suburb. You remember? Anyway, so I was the spokesperson at that time for that area. And that's how it started. Because they are very diversified group there, not just Vietnamese. I'm just saying that all the Asian country. I can't name them all now. The Thai, for example, they are the first, so I'll put it that way, they call, for the police anyway, have the interpreter, but the interpreter is called relationship officer in the police station. Because I worked there, of course, I was a litigation lawyer at that time. So I know the area very well, I know the court very well. So there was a real need at that time. So at that time, of course, it was a Liberal government. So it's easier for me to suggest it at that time after that. So I got the support from the upper house members. So that was getting support from the colleagues are very important in the upper house, to be frank. Of course, in those days, if I may say so, in the early days, Labour and Liberal upper house members are friends, and not loggerhead. We don't say we are Liberal or you are Labour. We all work together, actually. It's very cohesive, in fact. Even now, I guess. But at that time, so you can do what you like almost, suggest, I mean. So that was how it works in the old days, and I think even now. So we have the government suggested, I suggested it, the government accepted it, and then bingo, it goes.
It was such an important inquiry, that inquiry into Cabramatta, into policing into Cabramatta. And you said in the foreword for your 2001 report, you wrote this: "I congratulate the Cabramatta community for fighting for their right to be heard and to live and work without fear. The victory is yours."
Yes.
What impact did that inquiry and the outcome have for the community itself?
Because I think it's the first time that we actually advertise a different ethnic group newspaper. They can all come up, and we have interpreters of different people from the interpreting service in the old days, Any Affair Commission. So they send out their interpreter. So this is the first time the interpreter actually talking to all the member of parliament at that time. That was a good part. That is why it's so important. But not only that, I remember I had 23 recommendations, not from me, because I know the people, as I say, I worked there as one of them in the past, before I was a member. So I actually know the doctors, the pharmacists, all those, even some of the local people in their area, Fairfield, Cabramatta, Bonnie Rick, that kind of big west. And at that time, there's a lot of migrants in the 90s from that area. And they have their first temple, for example. I went to all the temples, and I know all the monks, and I am very involved in those times. That's why it was very cohesive in between the people and the parliament at that time, actually, I would say that. And of course, at that time, it's more men than women, as you were saying. So I was very outstanding, not outstanding, but outstanding in terms of stand out, because I know the local and I know my colleagues. So it was very effective. So our 23 recommendation, Bob Carr, if you say Bob Carr then, they implemented 21. And if I may say so, the result was actually published in all the newspapers. Not only that, it was on Times. I was interviewed by them, and all the ethnic newspaper. We used to have all the ethnic newspaper as well, like the Vietnamese. They still have the same one too, even now. Yeah. They were new at that time in the 90s. So it was 2020, and we have 2 years. That's why it's so long. We have first one. It's not long enough. So somehow or the other, we have the second inquiry for 2 years. It came over 3 years. And from a very little police station of only 4 policemen, 1 car for the 4 policemen, and no interpreter, and to a big, I think, the police station. And I don't know how many, they had different squads now. I don't know the details. But I was for myself, I think it's very effective, working between. That's why I say it is them who voice their opinion, voice their objection, voice the displeasure, everything. So everything come out. Yeah. So that was where I felt that if they didn't come forward, it won't have been so many changes by the government. By the government then. It was a Labour government, actually, Bob Carr. So he was the one who implemented 21 recommendation, our 23. So I was being praised by him, of course, and he was very good to us. Because I wasn't a Labour, but it was all treated equally. So the cooperation was fantastic. I think that's what Upper House is all about: cooperation between members, cooperation between people. That was at that time.
It's about the community,
yes.
and that was the thing, you know. Now, Cabramatta was just one of many multicultural communities across this state, and thinking back about that extraordinary inquiry into multiculturalism back in 2000 that enshrined those principles. Daniel, you are now one of the most powerful people, not only in New South Wales, but in Australia. What is the legacy of that reform, of that statement of multiculturalism being then at the heart of legislation, that underwriting principle?
Well, I'll just make 2 points of reflection. One about the opportunities it created for New South Wales, and the second would be about the resilience it fostered in New South Wales. Just in general, the fact that back in 2000 and earlier than that, we enshrined multiculturalism as a doctrine and as a principle, built institutions around it, tested those institutions, held those institutions to account, is the reason why most people who come to Australia call New South Wales their first home. And that it's also an immense asset for New South Wales and Australia. As Treasurer right now, I see the multicultural communities are the ones who tend to lead our engagement with the world. And equally, in a region that is becoming much more competitive, it's an immense asset for New South Wales and Australia relative to our competitors, our economic competitors in the area, and the people with whom we cooperate. To put this really simple terms, right now you are watching countries like Japan totally attempt to rewrite their social model to look more like New South Wales, a very advanced country, very respectful partnership we have with Japan, but it's an ageing society with an economy that requires the dynamism that is brought by multiculturalism. And the fact that you are watching other countries look to us at a time of great polarisation, when in many advanced democracies we are seeing great tension emerge. In just over the weekend, we've seen it in the United Kingdom. A month ago, we were witnessing this in France. We're witnessing similar effects in the United States. The fact that here in New South Wales and Australia it is so cohesive is not there by accident. It's because we built it. And we struggled to build it, and we learned as we did it. And that brings me to the story about us resilience. People may well recall earlier this year, we did bear witness to a terrorist attack in Fairfield. And that took place in the wake of a tragedy in Bondi, within 2 days of each other. And I had the opportunity to be sitting around in the crisis cabinet table, having to hear the reports about what was coming in that night from Fairfield. And whilst the incident we were hearing about was troubling, the resilience and the response of the community was amazing. The fact that we were able to, through Multicultural New South Wales, an agency which John and Natalie have led previously, within 15 minutes of the reports coming in, Multiculturalism New South Wales had convened all our faith leaders, all our community leaders, organised to release a statement within 90 minutes of the incidents, which was the reason the police were able to then use that statement and the commitment of our faith leaders to really assist in diffusing the tension and restoring order there, is a practical example of why this institution building and this culture of coherence we promulgate here in New South Wales matters immensely. And the fact that we were able to, in such a crisis circumstance, call on that resilience is something that we should not take for granted, has had to be built, needs to be nurtured, has to be invested in.
Absolutely. As Daniel says, Natalie, John, you're both, you formerly led multiculturalism in New South Wales as ministers for multiculturalism. What's your view of the importance of this and the legacy?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Treasurer. And it struck me, particularly with Multiculturalism New South Wales, at the we might come to this, but for me, leading that agency, I was led by that agency because they were so fast and agile and connected through long-standing relationships that Multicultural New South Wales had invested in. I was very aware when I was asked by Gladys Berejiklian, it's pleasing that we can all pronounce Berejiklian in this state. That's a great thing. But when she asked me to be Minister for Multiculturalism following on after John, and she said, Nat, and I said, Glad they're not going to listen to me. I'm a white Anglo Northern Beaches girl. But who do I need to talk to? And John was very helpful at that time as well. But we made sure we hit the phones very quickly with faith leaders who were absolutely critical, and with Multicultural New South Wales, and in particular Multicultural media, to hear messages in language, in your own print medium or through your news, particularly SBS, but local media outlets as well, to me was the lesson in speaking to people where they want to be and not forcing them, I think you said, Mr. President, to come here. And part of that was going out to communities, speaking to faith leaders and saying, will you stand beside me so that the community can see that we stand together on this. And as you said, Helen, as part of the upper house, the great collegiality we had. I had great collegiality with faith leaders, with community leaders, and with multicultural media. And a lot of that was driven by Multicultural New South Wales. I'm so very grateful for that fabulous institution, but also for those community leaders who would stand with us to get messages and give us credibility. It also helped a bit to have multicultural sports stars. I was also Minister for Sport, and that was a really commonality, a real thing. Sport brings brings people together, and it's something I'm passionate about. But I know when we had one of the crises in Afghanistan, and we had plane loads of people coming here, and there were kids that jumped on those planes who didn't speak a word of English, who had been in a terror zone literally a week before. We got them out with cricket bats. They couldn't speak English, but they knew how to play cricket. And we got an oval together, and it was one of those great healing things where these kids could just be kids and play cricket. And I played very badly, of course. But you know, it's those things that bring us together, the commonality, the food, the festivals, the sharing, which is why you're right, Treasurer. We need to invest in those things when we have the luxury and the opportunity of doing so, because when the crisis comes, we rely on them so deeply. And for me, that was part of what I was so very grateful for, was the opportunity to stand with so many faith leaders in particular, and but also cultural leaders and community leaders who would tell me not only how to pronounce things and what to do, but to get that credibility with communities who then I could earn the trust of to lead through some of those challenging times.
John, what about you? What was your experience as Minister?
I agree with everything that both Daniel and Natalie have said. If I give a couple of examples, firstly, we have to remember, and we should never lose sight of this, that statistically, it's approximately 48% today were either born overseas or have at least one parent who were born overseas. So if around this room, 1 in 2 of you were born overseas or you have a parent born overseas. On this stage, 1 in 2 of us were born overseas or have a parent who were born overseas. That is the reality of Australia. That is the reality of our multiculturalism that we have to accept. The best example I can give of what Multicultural New South Wales as an organisation created from that wonderful new Act in 2000 did is during COVID. So I had the honour of being the chair of the Sydney Local Health District. That's chairman of RPA Hospital, Canterbury, Concord and Balmain Hospital. So during COVID, we had to go out to the community. We had to sell the message of what you can do, what you shouldn't do, the immunisation, etc. The community were terrified, and communities from cold backgrounds were even more terrified. Within days, Multicultural New South Wales were contacted. Within days, they had all the literature in so many different languages, and within days, they were out talking to the communities in their language and explaining to them what was needed. And overnight, the response to the COVID pandemic changed completely, from a 10% participation to almost a 90% participation within the core communities. That's something we can't lose sight of. So during times of emergency, during times of hardship, during times of conflict, this is where we as a nation, a multicultural nation, truly come together. And this is where Multicultural New South Wales leads. And that's why I was thrilled to be their minister. It was, you know, it was a great opportunity to be able to. So we speak over 200 languages. We have over 165 interpreters working for Multicultural New South Wales. How can you not be proud of something of that nature? And that's the reality of what's needed. So I say to the Treasurer, whenever you've got that spare cash, whenever you've prayed to the God of money and he's giving you extra, put it in Multicultural New South Wales.
My budget, I gave them $73 million more.
I'm really disappointed to say that when I was minister, I was struggling for every dollar. So I'm sure the current minister, Steve Camper, must be very excited.
Could I just add a cheeky story to that, though, during that time of COVID? And it reminds you of those, you know, everyone remembers something about that time and as challenging as it was. And I remember that, who remembers the 11 o'clock press conference that Gladys and Dr. Kerry Chant would do every day at 11 o'clock, and a number of people were kind of glued to the TV at 11 o'clock to watch the statistics. And then we decided that a lot of people in the multicultural community were not watching the 11 o'clock press conference. It wasn't in language. They couldn't ask questions. So we decided with Gladys, she gave me permission to do a multicultural press conference. I called it the B grade because it was me, not her. But I had also a health medical medical professional, and we were online, but we had interpreters, we had it translated in real time, and this is where Multicultural New South Wales really stood up, and it was translated in real time. SBS live broadcast that, and we had questions, live questions, Q&A at the time. Anyone could ask a question on any matter of concern, and we had the medical professionals there and me, and we would answer questions about what you couldn't do going forward. And I think then I was doing sort of one-on-one interviews after that, and we were sort of talking about opening up and what we'd like to do. And I think I got a question at one point saying, "Oh, would you consider creating I think I was being interviewed by Indian News, and they said, "Would you create an Indian travel bubble?" And I said, "Sure, yeah, absolutely. Of course we consider that." Immediately my phone blew up and I got text messages from Gladys and everybody else saying, "Hey, have you just committed to an Indian unique travel bubble?" I said, yeah, of course we can do that. So there was a few things that were out of the box, but it was a time where we absolutely stood together, and having that Q&A straight away from the community made such a huge difference to reassuring people and answering questions in real time. So I really want to thank SBS and the multicultural media for helping during that, and all the translators, incredible translators out there.
Well, we've sort of thrown ourselves right into the heart of our third theme already, which is excellent, which is, of course, engaging with CALD communities. And according to census data from 2021, there are more than 2.3 million people in this state, close to a third of our population, who are born overseas, who are born in over 250 countries outside Australia. Now, we know that New South Wales is home to more than 300 ancestries, with just over half, as John said, of all residents in this state having at least one parent born overseas, with more than 280 languages being spoken at home other than English. These are more than statistics. These are people, and these are stories, and they embody the lives and the families and the lived experiences and the aspirations and the social needs and the communities that lie beyond the doors of Macquarie Street. So I want to think about the engagement with CALD communities in a particular way now, because I think it is simply impossible to have this conversation tonight without talking about racism. And I want to I don't want to spend too long on it, but I do think that it's incumbent on us to talk about it. Bob, in your maiden speech, you spoke about the world post 9/11 and the emergence of race in really divisive rhetoric that started skyrocketing. You talked about the Cronulla riots in 2005. Can you give us your thoughts about how individuals and communities' experiences of racism, what they do, particularly to trust in our public and civic institutions, and what we can do to rebuild that trust?
So, integrity in politics is absolutely critical, but integrity, broadly defined, goes to trust. And if you break that trust, you're breaking that social contract that civic institutions and civic leaders have with those communities. In my case, calling someone a terrorist in an era of post 9/11 during the Cronulla riots, they are just throwaway lines for the perpetrator. But for someone like me, they are searing. So to this day, that person who did it to me, the person who spat at me on the 136 bus to Manly, the abuse I copped at the football watching the Canberra Raiders, these are all things that are imprinted in my mind. But to the perpetrators, they wouldn't have thought twice about it, and I'm just a distant memory to them. The trouble is, people respond in very different ways. You take your victim as you find them. For me, it was a great motivator. And rather than get angry with the system, and rather than lose faith in the system, and rather than dismiss the system, I decided I would get involved in it and try and change from within. The difficulty is not everyone responds in that way. Some will retreat, some will become resentful. These days, with the online cesspit, you sort of, find comfort and company in with comrades in arms that are also aggrieved and disconnected. I think it's a very dangerous thing. I think it frays at the social cohesion that many migrants have come here for, and it certainly chips away at the trust people have in democratic institutions. I think, and this comes back to an earlier question you asked me about the role of political parties. So I'm sorry if I'm not being directly relevant, but you're used to it in the chamber. I just think the role of political parties is just so critical. The leadership of political parties and political leaders in not just the substance of debates, because they're fine. Debates around immigration are entirely legitimate, but the nature and tone of debate is far more critical if you're not going to alienate communities that are vulnerable. And certainly what I found as the General Secretary of the Labor Party, and parties spend an enormous amount of money on research, an enormous amount of money. And political research can very, very easily identify and exploit the infallibilities people have for political gain. Chipping away, exploiting people's fears, anxieties, fears of change, fears of differences, in a way that is really politically corrosive. So when I was the party secretary, we spent an enormous amount of money looking at issues, benchmarking messages, words, slogans, and you can very easily frame a political debate in a way, for any issue, frankly, in a way where dog whistling is part and parcel of it, and in a way that gives you an electoral dividend with persuadable voters. It is easy to do, and the roadmap is always there for any issue. But what it takes is leadership to restrain yourself from going there and saying to yourself, the short-term gain of winning some persuadable voters is not worth the long-term pain of the fraying of social cohesion and the damage to our democracy. And I think the great distinction of Australian politics in the main is that there is a bipartisan rejection of race as a brace for menacing rhetoric. And I think that is an extraordinary achievement. It is statesmanship over political opportunism. We should be proud of that. We should protect that. And we should resist the superficial, immediate allure of going there at all costs, because truly I have felt it when it happened during the Tampa debate, and it's unnecessary.
That was beautifully put. Daniel.
Clear, we can still abuse you for supporting the Canberra Raiders, can't we? Just yes. Just want to be clear about that.
Helen, you've been a leader in this state and this nation for decades. When you first entered Parliament, there weren't a lot of people who looked like you, let's be honest. So you must have seen more than your fair share of racism in this nation. My question to you is, looking back over that 40 years or so, what's your view? How have we progressed? Have we got better? And what do you see the future?
No, what was said was true. When I first came here, I actually got a couple of times now. I can cite you, tell you a couple of the personal incidents as a member of Parliament, mind you, because the Liberal Party had this sort of monthly meeting with the members, and I was one of the speakers, and for that 30 people in one of the hotel around here. I have this skinny head group of people. In the old days called, I can't remember the name now, about 20 odd years ago. They just marching into our meeting while I was speaking to say, death to you, Sham-Ho, death to you. I remember so well, because I was so frightened. There was a time when the Pope visited Australia. I can't remember when. Some of you probably remember the Pope from Rome came. So the report of our attack, I call, was overshadowed by the Pope's visit. So it's the same day. So I remember so well. Now that is racism to the extreme, mainly because they just destroyed the whole meeting. Of course, after that, we dispersed. Police came, actually, that's why. We called the police, because we couldn't have anybody, somebody running around here all night. You can't do that. So that was the racism to the extreme, I call, because it's not a personal attack in the body, but it's attacking what we are doing. But we are doing innocently. But because I was a speaker, that's all. So I felt it at the time. So there was one incident, very overtly racism against me personally. So that was one thing that I didn't like. Of course, that was a personal experience. But I'd like to go back actually to racism. I wouldn't say racism per se. I find it called racial discrimination. I was the only Chinese person in the pre-selection of the Liberal Party. I have no support. And even within, I wouldn't say names, I can't remember who purposely actually wouldn't let me, pre-selection, most people here know what is pre-selection. That means that you go to the party and you're pre-selected by the member to be a member of parliament in the upper house. That's how it works in the old days, the Liberal Party anyway. And there was no Chinese, and there's no women, almost no women. So I really missed my speech, because we had to make some speeches. So this is kind of, in your own rank, you are being discrimination, I think. I do think. Because I'm a woman to start. There's not very many women. And being the one and only, in the old days, called ethnic. So that was very overt in my mind, but I couldn't tell people that I'm being discriminated. So in the old days, you don't have racism, but I think discrimination is a very overt part of racism. And that's the two personal experience I have. One other one is, of course, after that, I was exposed on the newspaper. You know what happened? I received some letter to say, monkey come from, I remember well, I'll just say what I remember. Monkey come from trees. You know where you come from. Go back. That's racism. The exact words. Of course, I give it to the police too, because it was in my post and everything else, because I don't want to have any insulting kind of words. This is exactly what it said. Monkey come from trees, you know where it come from, go back. So there you are. This is overt racism. I don't think they have it now. I don't think none of the members have done that.
You think that things are better now?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because when he was saying about cohesion just now, because there are more different people around here now, and there's more women too. In the old days, in our rank,
helps,
there's only
by the
4 women. In my time, there's only 4 women in the rank, and ethnic is only less than half a dozen. In the whole parliament, less than half a dozen. Your Franca, Nick Couters in Labour, myself, and there's another one. About 4 or 5 non-Australian, I have to say. They are all Australian, only 4 or 5. Not born here, but Franca wasn't, Nick Couters wasn't. Who else? There's one more, I can't remember the name now, it's 36 years ago, and myself. So this changed, because they look at our ethnic here, I call ethnics, like John. So this is changing a lot. Nobody call me ethnic anymore.
On that note, we might move to our final topic for this evening, and that is imagining diversity for the future. So this year is the bicentenary of the Parliament, and it offers us a really valuable opportunity to create a milestone. It's an opportunity to not only mark history, but to make it. The motto of our bicentenary this year is to reflect, celebrate, imagine. And in the context of this conversation, we reflect on the successes and the lessons of the past to forge an even stronger council for the future. A council that continues to serve the ever-changing fabric of the community that it represents, and that is you. So before we hear your questions, because it's about to be your time, so think about what you want to ask, I want to ask each of our panellists just for some final thoughts on their reflections on this evening's discussion, about how they imagine a representative parliament of the future, and a message that they want to leave all of us with tonight. And we'll start with you, Treasurer.
I think that for the LC, the choice that remains in front of the LC is whether or not it's going to continue to play its role of being the vanguard of change in how our democracy functions, and that means making sure that the House is picking up on the changes that are happening in the community and reflecting them in who exercises power and the accountability that we apply to those with power. And I make that point really to recognise the fact that we've got to recognise the cold communities are changing in New South Wales. They're not static. They aren't frozen in time. It is now evolving very fast. We have, in the cold communities, you now have a decent cluster of people who have come here under skilled migration programs. It's very different to people who came here under refugee settlement programs. That people have come with a very different set of interests and a very different set of ambitions as well. Most multicultural cold community members are bilingual, trilingual, or speak more than one language. English is not necessarily as big a barrier as it once was. Second point I'd make in that respect is that there's got to be a recognition as well that we now have lots of people who, parents had the immigrant experience, but they themselves have grown up here as the children of immigrants. Bob, myself, classics of that genre, as is John and others. But now we are having generations now, like my kids, who are heavily connected to their heritage, but you wouldn't see it and you wouldn't spot it. And you wouldn't be able. My wife is fourth generation Welsh Australian from Armidale. Our kids don't necessarily look the way I do, but their knowledge of the culture is just as strong, and that's a common occurrence too, as well. And so if the LC, as it goes from years 200 to 225 and 250, it's going to have to reflect all those experiences. And it's going to have to reflect the fact that as our society changes, this institution is either going to fossilise in time or it's going to keep pace.
Very well put. Natalie.
Thank you. I'll come back to where I began, and for me, this is the most harmonious multicultural community in the world, and we face our challenges from time to time. Of course we do. The world stage faces them, but we have a unique country here, an island where, unless you're Indigenous, everyone is from somewhere. We're all Australians, and we have this unique combination of multi-faith, multicultural, everyone contributes to what the fabric of Australia is. And it's like a fantastic patchwork quilt where it is better because of the colour and movement and change and difference and diversity. I'd love to see that grow. And I think that we should be absolutely vigilant about protecting the unique country that we have here. It helps that we're an island. It helps that we're a little way away, but embracing our sisters and brothers locally in our region, of course, but being that refuge, being that island where it is safe and you can be anything here. And I think I'll try and say it respectfully, but while I think the United States prides itself on that, we do it a whole lot better than that because we are safe. We're not as extreme. I think I really heard what you said, Bob, about resisting that political temptation to have the cheap shots, which don't pay off in the end anyway. And you're right, people in Australia can sniff rubbish a mile away. So integrity is absolutely the only thing that has longevity. The longevity we need to see in that. But in this House, I would like to see us being bold and leading the way, because we can do that, I think, in the confines. Because we are the Legislative Council, we have a slightly longer term here, and we have the ability to lead the way, as you did with the inquiry that you opened up. We can lead through those thought leadership committee inquiries where we can really test those issues respectfully together and stand together as a House to be able to challenge some of those difficult issues of the time. But I do cling to, we are an incredible country, 244 languages, hundreds of religions and faith identification. You can do so freely and happily here for the most part. We should absolutely protect that, every one of us, for every one of those those cultural groups. I'd like to see a bit more bold agenda from us, though, in this House, and I think we can be brave and do that.
Hear, hear. Helen, what about you?
Thank you. I have too much to say. To me, I don't think that the parliament or government is from parliament had focused about education too much for the non-English speaking background people. I do think that they should have not only migrants coming here, migrants, because it's a federal issue, but they come here, they should learn English. I just met my new neighbor. She can't speak English. I said, you can't speak English, you have 3 kids. She almost cannot get a job because they can't speak English. So I actually thought in the old days when the migrants come, they have 10 hours learning English. I don't think they have it these days. I think if the federal don't do it, because education is our responsibility, I think we should have that kind of education in school, so the kids can tell the parents, if you like. But I do think that language barrier is a big barrier for migrant group. Anytime. So this is one thing I think is very important for the children at home, for the parents at home. So this is important. I think my daughter's here. I pay a lot of money to try to get my children to learn Chinese because they can't speak Chinese at all. I feel so bad about it. But even my daughter can only speak a little bit because she lives in Hong Kong for a while. Anyway, so I think education itself is very important. Just because I tell you why, one of my grandchild is in a private school. She can't even get to the Chinese language because there's full quota. So, of course, ask her to do French or German to her. For me, it's useless. She can't even go to Hong Kong and live in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? I can't change being black hair and yellow skin. So people would say, you can't speak Chinese, and it's a shame in herself that she lack of this sense of belonging, in a sense. I think this is very important for individual growth, that's all.
Thank you very much. John, what about you?
Look, thanks, Ben. Ben, coming back to this parliament, if this parliament doesn't continue to evolve to meet the expectations, the needs, the requirements of the community it represents, a multicultural community, again, 1 in 2 of us born overseas or one parent born overseas, then the reality is this parliament won't succeed. Any political party who doesn't grasp the fact that 1 in 2 of the voters were born overseas or have a parent born overseas and doesn't accept that and work to that is not going to be a very successful party. My concern as a former president is this: will 42 members be enough? Will 42 members be enough to reflect our ever-evolving, ever-growing 150 languages, 200 languages, 150 cultures, 200 cultures, etc. Maybe not. Maybe there will be a time where the 42 need to grow, so you can be more reflective of each and every person. But if I could finish with this, Ben. I have 2 beautiful grandchildren whose father's of the Italian background. Mother, of course, is of Lebanese background. I love saying that my 2 grandchildren already speak 3 languages, Italian, Arabic, and English. But what I also love to say is they're 50% Italian, 50% Lebanese, 100% Australian. That's who they are. That's the reality. The 10-year-old has finally worked out, but Grandpa, that's 200%. And I go, I'm a politician, just accept it's 200%. It's okay, it's how you add up. So, but the reality is, that's who we're becoming. So it's no longer, and this is where we're evolving, it's no longer that all of my family are of a Lebanese background. The reality is that I have a son-in-law who's of Indian background, I have one who's of Greek background, I have one who's Macedonian background, one who's Italian. That's who we're becoming. We're becoming so integrated in so many cultures that we need to also take that into account for our children and our grandchildren, because that is the future.
Beautifully put. Bob.
It's
really hard following 4 really good contributions to wrap it up. So I'm genuinely going
You
to
could
struggle
commit to
here.
increasing the size of the parliament, as John wants you to do.
We'll work on that. I suppose I'll make a couple of really quick general observations and then probably just a quick thought on the next battleground for probably people like Daniel and I, sort of next generation of called representatives. First observation is we should absolutely be proud of and celebrate where we've come from and where we are and never lose sight of it. So some people like to go to the Blue Mountains for a day out and look at their surroundings and absorb their surroundings. For me, it's actually going to a place like Burwood Road, where you see people of Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern, European and Anglo-Saxon backgrounds so unremarkably just lingering on the main street, dealing with each other, talking to each other, in the playground together, in schools together, in workplaces together. It is such an unremarkable thing now, but God, it's so precious. And that is just something that every time I see it, it just gives me goosebumps. And I just never want to forget how far we've come in a relatively short space of time. The other thing for me as a reasonably new member of this place is actually being proud of and celebrating and not seeking to change too much the role of the upper house and how it functions. I know that it can be frustrating for governments not having a majority in the upper house, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, for governments to achieve a majority. So you never have this sort of tyranny of the majority in the upper house. You always got this institutional minority. It is a frustrating thing for governments, no doubt. But it is so incredibly useful and important to making sure that coalitions of support are built across party lines, so that legislative changes, social policy changes do not hit the extremes like we see in the US. And that fundamentally grounds the cohesion that parents like mine were so attracted to when they came here. And the role of the upper house, the way it is structured and the way it functions, is really important for that. And finally, people like John and Helen fought the good fight for people like Daniel and I, fighting injustice. Their fight for less injustice made us the beneficiaries, but our next task is probably not about less injustice, but more promotion of people from called communities. So we probably need to take the baton and probably fight that new battleground for people of diverse communities.
Thank you very much. Well, I think you'll agree that it's been a fantastic discussion, but now we've got the opportunity to have a few questions from you. So if we could turn up the lights just a little, if that's possible, so that I can see where questions actually
we get
are.
the disco lights in the
I-
Jambalaya.
You haven't noticed, when I became president, a lot of things changed, buddy. So seriously, if we could turn up the house lights a little, please.
You asked me for money for the lifts.
Thank you. Right, we will go to this lady just here first. There is a microphone that will come around. And if I could ask, we'll get through more questions if we can keep them relatively short. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, I'm Shanti Raman. I'm a paediatrician from southwestern Sydney, but also representing Hindus for Human Rights, Australia, New Zealand. My questions are, we have come a long way. It's fantastic to celebrate multiculturalism. A couple of the fissures that I see, one is tokenism. When you want to get representation, say from the Indian community, and we are 1.4 billion people, hugely diverse, you often would go to the most obvious source, and it might be Hindu Council of Australia or whatever. It ignores the very great diversity within a nation, a secular, multicultural nation like India, with many different faiths, traditions, and a proud secular history. So that's one issue that I'd really like us to grapple with. The other, obviously, is the big fish of gender, the intersectionality of gender and racism. And so while we are seeing more women being represented and fighting for that, we're still fighting for that. We know that women of color in particular find it very hard to go beyond the middle level. And it is still something that is enormously difficult. So I think we need to address that and not be tokenistic again, appoint one woman of color to one position. It's got to be much more organic than that. So that's just my
Thank you
points.
so much. That was a very insightful comment. Who'd like to make some comments about either tokenism or gender? John, please.
Look, thank you for that. Can I start with this? 30, 40 years ago, I would have given anything for tokenism. It didn't exist. We didn't even have tokenism. No one was prepared to talk to you. Everyone thought you were a fool to raise any issue that had anything to do with prejudice. The usual comment to me was, look, oh, for goodness sake, grow up and, become part of the real world. That was the answer I was given. Then we moved to tokenism. I really do believe that we are genuinely going past tokenism now. I truly believe that we are genuinely looking at how do we resolve these issues? How do we continue to work? And I really look at organisations such as Multicultural New South Wales leading the way in relation to that, and seeing so many communities organising their own associations, their own groups, where they're genuinely working for their community. I can tell you this because I was invited to 600 dinners each and every year, and on most evenings there were 10 or 15 dinners from different organisations. I mean, we have thousands of them now. So we have gone past tokenism, but there's still a long way to go. As Morris Yema once said, absolutely moving in the right direction, but a long way to go. And as long as people such as you get up and say, I'm sick of tokenism, I want some real answers, the changes won't occur. But they are starting to occur, and that's a wonderful thing. As far as question number 2, I'll leave that to someone else, the gender.
Natalie or Helen, would you like to make some comments about the gender issue?
Well, I do think that it's better than nothing, being a tokenist, because I was a token Chinese at the time. You had to know that at that time, 36 years ago. So I don't mind being a token, as long as there's someone who can represent you. Sorry, I'm sort of a bit different from you saying. I don't mind being called token. I've been told being a token for a long, long time. I don't mind it.
All right, we might go to
It's better
this.
than nothing.
This fellow here just down the middle. Thank you. Sorry, we'll just wait until we get the microphone, if that's all right, sir.
Can we have more lights, perhaps?
If we're able to turn up the house lights a
It's not
little more, that
question,
would
it's
be
a
great.
comment, basically. What I have seen changes. I came to Australia about 56 years ago. I came on a scholarship to do PhD in engineering at Monash. The first question I was asked is, what should we call you? What should we call you? With everybody who came from overseas, this was the question. Because a lot of names are longer. I said, my name is very simple. I had no problem. Then, about 30 odd years ago, my son did IT on a scholarship, and he wanted to change a job. And he went one interview. He was born here. He was told, your English is not good. Okay? After that, what I have seen change is I travel around the world. This is the only country where the food, you go out of what few kilometers from your house, you get every type of food you want. So I've seen the changes. This is only my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will take that as a comment, sir. The lady just down the back there.
Hi there. My name's Polina. I was born here and so are my parents, but my grandparents are from Ukraine, so I'm still heavily involved in the Ukrainian community. And I'm actually a youth member on Multicultural New South Wales Advisory Board. I'm having a lot of fun. My question is, how can we engage cold youth so that they are interested in politics and want to take on future jobs in government? Thank you.
I might throw that to Natalie to start.
Yeah, thank you, Paulina, and congratulations on your role. That's magnificent. And I think there's a couple of things. So Multicultural New South Wales has a program for youth specifically to engage in online, calling out racism online and picking it up. We're less adept at it as we get older, but you guys are great at it. And so it was really about monitoring that and responding quickly. I think that's a really good way to engage and utilise those skills. But also for me, and it's this, I hate these kind of sayings, but it's, you can't be what you can't see. Opening up this house, as you've done, Mr. President, saying this is the people's house. You are welcome here anytime. This is your house. You belong here. You are welcome in here. And whenever I see school groups in here, and I feel sorry for them because they're, saying line up there and stay in the corner. I know that has to happen, Mr. President, but I kind of sneak over and say, this is your house. You're welcome here anytime. You can come on in. The front doors are open. You don't need to be here on a school tour or an organised tour. You're most welcome within the confines of the parliamentary security to come on in. And I think it's about opening up these institutions so people can see them and so our youth can see them and be in here and experience the youth parliament, see young people like yourselves debating on television and standing up across the country and vocalising it and seeing that debate and engaging, but deliberately ensuring that youth parliament and programs like that through the schools are so important. There's also an incredible program called Together for Humanity, which brings kids from all different religions together. A few of you recognise it, so they can meet each other, so they can actually see people from different faith groups and different communities and actually talk about how they can make a difference and get them thinking about it right now. There are so many great programs out there, but I think particularly your role in multiculturalism and through the media is incredibly important, and you have at your fingertips now a whole range of ways that you can get out there and talk. But I think being seen, being visual and telling us what we need to be doing better, and also seeing that you have a treasurer, Daniel Mookey, you had a premier in Gladys Berejiklian, you have former members, here that are leading the way and living and breathing that every day. We just need you to step up.
Thank you. We'll go down the front here to this gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Syed Samnan. I have been working for New South Wales government for the last 15 years, and I do acknowledge the cultural awareness and the role it has and how it helps big time. But we do see representation. My question is more related to representation. So we do see representation in Daniel or Bob or all the other members. To be very honest, until today, I wasn't aware of Dr. Helen Sham-Ho. But funnily enough, even though the difference between our age and the time when you migrated and have been active in the Legislative Council and the current time, we are probably about 20, 30 years apart. But or maybe even more, but some of the things that you have said resonate so much with our experience. So the point I am trying to raise is, my daughters are born here. I've got 3 daughters. One of them goes to high school and slowly getting interested in how world operates, but their way and their worldview is very different from ours. Obviously, it is shaped by their experiences. Now, having said that, I'll give a very current example. As I was saying, I'm from Bangladesh, so Bangladesh is currently going through a lot of political turmoil. And recently, there was a fall of government, and the whole thing about democracy and the importance of it. Now, people from Bangladesh, from my generation, or people who are migrating, are very aware of the importance of democracy, whereas my daughter takes democracy as something given. Because for her concept or for her world, there is nothing else other than democracy. You go through schools and you go through all the institutions, everywhere there is democracy, you vote your leader. So the point I'm trying to make is, we had people like Dr. Helen, 36 or 40 years ago, representing the migrant communities, but as far as I know, we don't see many of such people who have actually migrated themselves here. because they've got a very different mindset. And Australia being a net immigration country, we will continue to have new migrants. So how do we overcome that?
Thank you. Daniel, would you like to make some comments on this?
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, thank you for your public service for the New South Wales government. Second is, you're quite right to say that I know lots of people from Bangladesh and the Bengali community are paying close attention to what's happening in Bangladesh right now. And we, of course, all pray that Bangladesh emerges as a strong and healthy democracy after these changes that come through. Your question is quite a good one about how do you make sure parliaments look like the people that they represent. And you're quite right to say that we all have a lot of work to do to make sure that the parliament continues to reach its ideals, and its ideals is matched in its reality. All I will simply say in that response is in terms of making sure that people who are first generation migrants are properly represented is firstly to acknowledge the leadership of people like Dr. Helen, Sham-Ho, because it is very, very hard. Second is to simply recognise that public representation is a privilege, and it's hard for lots of people, and we can't forget that too. And the third point I'd simply make is it is interesting that Parliament is not good at necessarily representing first generation migrants, but it's getting a lot better at representing second generation migrants. And I can't but help notice that lots of people who are entering the Parliament are people who are like I am, the children of migrants. And but we're not just seeing them now interested in Parliament, we're seeing them ascend in the executive arms of government as well. I'm very fortunate to be the Treasurer, but the Deputy Premier is a person of biracial Indian heritage, and there's 4, 5, 6 people in the Cabinet that I can think of immediately who are now in such roles. As Natalie pointed out, we succeeded a government that 3 years ago was led by a person called Premier Berejiklian. And to be fair to Premier Berejiklian, she was the successor to a person named Premier Yema as well. And so we are, and I think it would be a mistake not to recognise the progress our democracy is making in representing everyone. And I always make the point that you can't necessarily expect a perfect democracy, but we should always be striving for one.
Thank you. I know that there is going to be a lot of interesting questions, but I also note that we've gone 15 minutes over time already. So we will have 2 finally. We'll start with that lady there.
Kia ora, my name is Agatha. I'm from the Cook Islands originally, and I have 2 of my colleagues here with me. We come from a diverse background, so we speak different languages. We don't speak each other's languages. We speak one common language. My question is, how do you navigate through the mental diversity of emotions and triggers of a multicultural community? What I mean by that is representation matters. Okay, so when we're talking about first generations and second generation people, the triggers and histories of each person that comes here, I feel like I agree with Helen that all of these things need to start in education. We need to learn about each other's backgrounds. We need to learn about each other's histories, why we react the way we react, why do we get triggered. We need to learn about those things individually, because my generation, my parents' generations, I don't understand why they were triggered and why they raised me the way they did. My children don't understand why I'm passing on things because we weren't taught those things. So it's up to each individual community to teach our own communities, this is why we are the way we are. And when we come to a different country, this is how we integrate into this country. Because at the end of the day, the Aboriginal people and the people that have come before us 200 years ago and created this amazing country have embraced us and embraced our diversity. So it's understanding our triggers and what pushes our communities, and I think it brings in a better understanding. And when I look at my children, they say, we don't understand why you react the way you do because I don't experience what you've experienced. I don't know that history. I don't have the emotional connection to the history that you are talking about. And I think that's the crux of the matter. That's what it comes down to. So
Thank you very much. Would any of our panellists like to comment? That was a really interesting perspective.
Oh, I see. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. To this lady, yes, you just there.
Thank you so much for organizing this. My name is Seema Balasubramanian. I am also a lawyer. Thank you. I'm glad to see that 2 lawyers are here. Being a woman, it's only we are getting... All of us are lawyers, thank you. Which is good. Being a woman, always we get only 25% or whatever allocated quota. We won't be able to get more than that quota in the pre-selection and being a candidate. My question is to Ms. Helen and John. You were 3 decades or 4 decades before. You both are having a culturally diverse background, and being a woman, how did you break the barriers and getting into this pre-selection? Thank you.
Well, no, it's a very good question because I encounter both an ethnic and a woman. I have double whammy, I always say that. But to overcome that, you have to, I think to start with, you have to have a very good English because you can talk them down. So, secondly, as a woman, that's why I'm very assertive. You have to learn to be very assertive. Particularly in party room, they call, in the party room, it was Nick Reiner, the premier, who told me, you have to stand up and say what you want to say. Although you may have the same message, you say it differently. So that's all I can give you my own story. I've been told many times, and I listen to people what they told me, and I do that, what they told me, because after all, they're senior, they're more experienced. But for the pre-selection, I understand it perfectly, because I was the only Chinese there, so there's no ethnic, no cult people you call. And then, of course, being a woman, in my time, in the parliament or the upper house, altogether, we have 4 women in my rank, in the Liberal Party. So it is up to the party, if I may say so, because I'm not a party person anymore, I'm an independent for a long time, because I disagree with the principle, some of the principle, I'm sorry, I don't mean it terrible. I mean, I'm basically very liberal in terms of value, but I am independent for a long time. But because I am assertive, this is it, you have to stand on your own value. This is very important. My daughter is agreeing with me because I cut her down too. Although you listen to your daughter, but however, I listen to of course, my son-in-law. Now, this is a traditional value that you might have to change because men somehow is more dogmatic, more authoritarian, and more powerful. But that attitude had to be changed. I think this is, again, education, that you can be speaking equally. Education, to me, is primarily important.
Well, I can't think of a better place to end than that note. Can I thank all of you for being here tonight? Can I particularly thank our panellists for their candour, generosity in sharing their personal as well as their professional experiences. Thank you too to the Legislative Council's Black Rod team. Once again, you have done a wonderful job in organising a really terrific event this evening. But most importantly, thank you to you for being here. I think as you've seen through the questions, we have a wonderful, diverse group of people here tonight representing, I suspect, many, many backgrounds. And it's fantastic that we're able to achieve what we sought to achieve tonight in bringing together such a wonderful group of people. Can I give you all an invitation, though? This is the 200th year of the Parliament, and we're having an open day on the 25th of August in Parliament. There'll be a whole range of events. There'll be music and food and lectures and exhibitions and everything. Please come along to it, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy the day greatly. You can register online. But can I say to all of you once again, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for such a wonderful discussion. We'll be around for a little bit, so feel free to come up and talk to us individually if you didn't get your question asked. But please drive home safely tonight, and thank you for being here.